Hey y'all, welcome back to another video. Thank you for watching, and I appreciate it if you would subscribe and follow along. I promise I'm going to start some fishing videos. The weather's just not been cooperating with us here in Arkansas. We've got 10 inches of snow on the ground right now. A lot of tournaments have been moved. So hopefully I'll get to start filming some fishing videos pretty soon. But I want to wrap up the bladed jig, vibrating jig video series that I've done. This will be part 3, the last one. I'm going to talk about trailers and rod and action, reels, line, everything you need to know to use the bait on the water. So follow along and hopefully you learn something from this. So as you can see here, I've got a variety of colors and different style trailers laid out here. Kind of want to just briefly go over each one of them and to explain what situations and why I use one versus the other and what brand I like over the other brand. So follow along and I'll break this down a little bit more in detail. For the trailers that I use on these vibrating jigs, it varies from color to style and what I'm fishing. Do I want to fish fast, slow? Typically I'm fishing it fast, so I tend to stray away from the first one that I'll show, and that is your Gary Yamamoto Zacho. It's probably the most talked about trailer on this bait, and you see most guys using this, but to me it makes the bait rise way up in the water column. It doesn't stay in the strike zone for me because I fish it so fast, and I use it as a search bait. Like I said in previous videos, I'm really searching for these fish, and so I'm trying to cover water, and I don't have time to slow down and get this in the strike zone. So the Zacho for me personally is not my go-to bait. A lot of people love it, and I completely understand, but I will show you my go-to bait, and that is going to be the Yum Swimming Dinger. And so what this is it's made by Yum. It's a Senko style bait, and then it's got the paddle tail on it. And the paddle tail puts off a whole lot of action. It's a super thin bait, so the blade on the jig really gives that bait some action. And what I like to do is I cut it off about halfway and I thread it up on the bait, and so it's super compact. And what this does is it allows to mimic the shad. In Arkansas, my lakes, the shad are typically pretty small. We don't have just a whole lot of big gizzard shad, so you're usually typically trying to mimic a 2 to 3.5 inch shad at the most. And so this bait really mimics that in our water. And so that's the one that I use when I'm searching a flat or fishing a point where I see bait fish active, jumping. And this is the #1 bait that I'm going to be throwing at them. And so moving on from that one, you've got your Green Pumpkin Swimming Yum Dinger. Same deal, cut it off about half. You can leave this one, shorter or a little bit longer because you're going to be mimicking a bluegill. You're going to throw this around buckbrush, brim beds, wherever you might have a bluegill bite. When the bass are spawning, it's a really good bait to kind of throw around because brim they're there to eat the eggs, so your bass are going to react to a brim. And so this is a really good trailer. Same thing, a Yum Swimming Dinger, and this one is in Green Pumpkin. Moving on to the black and blues, I will use the Swimming Yum Dinger in black and blue as well. But typically, when I'm using black and blue, it's because it's muddy. So I want to add some more action in the water, and I'm going to go with a Zoom Ultra Vibe Speed Crawl. And what you get on this bait is kind of the horny toad top legs. Gives off a whole lot of vibration. I do use it in white whenever I'm trying to fish a little bit slower with the white bait or with the white jackhammer and keep it up in the water column. I will throw this on there, but most of the time I'm throwing it on a black and blue jig, and that just gives off a whole lot of action in the muddy water, so it allows the fish to track it and find it a little bit easier. Same thing, this is the Spring Crawl color. The other one, that was blueberry, and this is just black and red flake Ultra Vibe Speed Crawl. And I'll do the same thing with Green Pumpkin, but most time you're mimicking a bluegill, so I typically will stick with the Swimming Yum Dinger. So moving on from the trailers, I want to talk about the rod and reel setup a little bit, and I'll go over that with you next. Alright, so moving on from the trailers, I'm going to talk about the rod setup that I like to use. I use the Abu Garcia Veritas. I throw it on a 7/6 medium heavy, and the reason I go with the medium heavy is because this rod has a lot of tip, and it's going to give back to the fish whenever they hit this bait, because you're going to be burning it most likely. And so when they run up and grab it, swipe at it or whatever, this rod will give back to the fish and allow to get the proper hook set up, or the hook in the fish, versus a heavy action rod, you could rip it out of the fish's mouth, or you could jerk it away from them before they even get a chance to get it. So I always go with a longer rod with the lighter tip on it to allow that on a moving bait. The reel, I use the Abu Garcia Revo S, and this is the 6:4 to 1 gear ratio. Had a lot of success with this reel. I've had some of these for close to 10 years, no issues whatsoever. I oil them every year and just try to maintain them. That's one good tip that I could give you on your reel for longevity of it. And on this reel, I use a 6:4 to 1 because mentally I want to know that I'm reeling this bait fast. In a high gear ratio reel, you're going to be reeling too fast most of the time, and then a low gear ratio, you're going to be working yourself to death. So 6:4 to 1, I'm burning it, I can feel that I'm burning it, and it's just the right speed and the right reel for this application. As for the line, I always throw the chatterbait on 12-pound test, and I use the Berkley Vanish fluorocarbon. It's not one of the super high-end lines, but to me, I don't see a reason to pay 3-4 times the price of this line to get another line that's almost identical. I've used this line for just as long as the reels, probably close to 10 years now, and I've never had any issues with it. If I've ever broke the line, it was because of my own fault of not retying enough, or I hit a rock or something. And so the line, I cannot say enough about this line. You can get it from your local Walmart, and it's really good line in my opinion. So that's gonna wrap up the rod, trailers, and line setup. I kind of want to talk about the action of the rod real quick. I know I can't demonstrate on the water because I'm not on the water really well, but I'll show you what I'm talking about and just play with it a little bit when you're on the water, and I think you'll see some difference in your bites with this bait, because it is the #1 tip that I can give you on this bait is the way that I use it and work it in the water. So let me show you that real quick. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is the action that you put in the rod and reel. I've mentioned that it's the #1 tip I can give you, and it's going to be up to you to try different variances and see what works for your lake and what the fish like the most for any given day. They change daily. But what I like to do is I throw it out there, and as soon as it hits, I just start reeling, constantly reeling. You can just reel it back and you're gonna get bites because the bait's gonna jump all over the place given the blade. But what I like to do is I put action in the rod, and by that I mean, I can either just give it a little subtle action, or you give it a lot of action, and it makes the bait dart and jump off to the side. And if you got a fish trailing it or whatever, they're gonna just react and grab it. And that's what you're trying to do. You want a reaction. It's a reaction type bait. And so that's what, putting more action in a bait that's already great, you're gonna make it even that much more better. #2 is throw it into cover, like a lay down or a brush pile that you can see sticking up on a flat or something like that. Grass, things like that. It's a super weedless bait, and the blade kicks back and makes like a weed guard. And so it really can come through a lot of things, and you can't really worry about losing the bait because that's where the fish are at. They're in those ambush points, and that's what you're trying to hit. And if you can hit a side of a dock post or a limb or anything sticking out of the water that is going to make the bait deflect again, then it's going to trigger those fish that are in those ambush points, and that's what you're trying to do. All right, y'all, that's going to wrap it up for this video, as well as the Bladed Jig series. I really hope that I've taught you something that you can apply on the water and find success with. Ultimately, that's what I'm here to do, is share information that I've learned over the years and pass it down, and just hope to help you on the water one day. And so hopefully that doesn't help beat me one day in a tournament, but if it does, so be it. I'm here to share information. Just remember, I can tell you all these tips and try to help you as much as you want, but to find your own success on the water, you have to be willing to fish for it. We'll see y'all.